Welcome, welcome, guys. We are back for another episode of The Lock-In. I'm joined, as usual, by my compatriot and fellow Unibet ambassador, Dara O'Kearney. Dara, welcome.
Delighted to be here on this wonderful sunny day.
How is it going, Dara? How is it in sunny Ireland for the 3 days a year we get some sun?
Yeah, I mean, this is the perfect time of year. I'm usually not here because I'm usually in Vegas at this time of year, so I'd kind of forgotten how nice Irish summers are. But yeah, it's the perfect temperature where it's nice and warm, but it's not so warm that you're unpleasantly sticky. So yeah, definitely enjoying the Irish summer.
Yeah, unpleasantly sticky is definitely how I would describe how I feel right now. I feel like the guy out of Raiders of the Lost Ark whenever I'm out eating at the moment, just face meltingly warm here in Malta. We are joined this week by a former guest of the chip race. He is in many ways an unsung hero in poker, a musician, a video editor, and the man behind the Doug Polk Poker channel. He is the former head of multimedia for Bluff and the current creative director for PokerKing Media. He is seriously serious. He is Thomas Keeling. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We are delighted to have you, Thomas. I know you are just back from Cabo San Lucas, where you produced the coverage for the excellent WPT Heads-Up. I am dying to talk to you about that. But before, I'm afraid I'm going to have to start with some sad news, actually, from the world of poker and the world of Irish poker. Specifically, Noel Furlong passed away, the 1999 WSOP Main Event champion. He passed away on Sunday at the age of 83. Noel was also the 1987 and 1989 Irish Poker Open champion back in the early years of that event. Not a bad resume for a man who you could rightly describe as a full-time businessman. Dara, I know you played against Noel a few times. What are your memories of him?
Yeah, I think I probably only played against Noel once. I think it was the 2011 Irish Open, which was the big Irish Open where they got people like Negreanu and Hellmuth to come over. So Paddy Power made a big deal of it that year. And I do have a memory of moving to a table late on day one with Noel on it. He was obviously quite elderly by this stage. I guess he was in his early 70s, but he was a bit of a legend as still the only Irish player to have won the WSOP Main Event, two-time Irish Open champion. People kind of knew that he wasn't really a professional poker player. He was independently wealthy. I believe he was worth approximately 100 million from his business. He was also a very successful horse trainer. So he was basically just a businessman who played for fun, but he had developed a very particular style, which was actually brutally effective back in the day. He made it just all about pre-flop. He just picked spots where he had a sort of a semi-decent hand and just moved all in pre-flop. And this was back in the day when people didn't really like calling off no matter how strong their hand was pre-flop. They all believed that they had all these incredible post-flop edges. So it was brutally effective, and it did propel him to 2 Irish Opens and the WSOP Main Event.
Well, tributes have come in from far and wide. Jesse May told a great story on Twitter all about Noel's hero call against Hookseed on that WSOP final table. It certainly showed how fearlessly he played. That was, of course, the same year that Irishmen Porrick, Parkinson and George McKeever also made the final table. That win wasn't Noel's only WSOP Main Event final table. In fact, in 1989, the year Phil Hellmuth won, Noel came 6th, famously bluffing Phil off top pair and the second nut flush draw. Who knows how he managed to get him to do that. Dara, based on what you're saying about his loose gambly style, it probably is the case, and you alluded to this, that in a time where pros fancied their post-flop edges and maybe some soft money that they could have got down the streets against weaker opponents, he still loads of equity back, bulldozing them pre-flop. I believe he had one very famous nemesis.
Yeah, every time I think of Noel, there was one particular thing which always springs to mind, and I'm sure you can relate to this, David. Early in your career, I'm pretty sure probably somebody at the table tilted you. They got the better of you playing in a style that you thought wasn't good. And I'm guessing that similar to me, you probably went home and wrote a blog about it. Maybe mentioned them by name, maybe actually getting their name wrong just to add salt to the wounds, but. Certainly that's something I've been guilty of, but I was always amused when I read Super System, which was one of the first books I read, to see that he apparently had this effect on Doyle Brunson, because right at the end of Doyle's section on tournament play, and the section on tournament play, which is good of its time and sort of goes early stages around the money bubble all the way to the final table. But after final table, when you think, well, there's nothing to be said after the final table, he had a section which he called Wild Card. And I'm going to read the start of that now. There is one more thing you may need to consider. The ever-increasing number of weaker players entering tournaments has added a new element in poker. I call it two-card hold'em. These weaker players know that they can't compete with better players and that they will get outplayed in the latter stages of the hand. So they simply wait for two high cards or a wired pair and bet all their chips before the flop. I've seen this type of player go deep into the second and third day of tournaments by doing this. In fact, I think Noel Furlong, not the name, a winner of the WSOP champion, mostly used this strategy. So I'm pretty sure that Noel must have tilted Doyle along the way to the point that Doyle decided to put him on blast in the book.
Fantastic stuff. Well, as I said, tributes have poured in, and we'll add ours to it. A legend, and our condolences to his family. To the big story from last week, poker legend Phil Ivey wins the WPT PokerKing Heads-Up event. Thomas, we're into your wheelhouse now. You had a front row seat for this one. The tournament was a sort of hybrid, players playing on devices, but also, for the most part, live across the table from each other. Some of them were satellited in. People talk about Ivey's presence, his intimidating stare, his ability to make soul reads. Were there moments where you could see, even though he was somewhat mediated, him still able to do that?
Arguably. Most of the players that Phil had to play against in that tournament were very tough players. There were softer sections of the bracket. There were tougher parts of the bracket. Phil didn't really have any easy matches. So I think most of his opponents were probably experienced players who play for high stakes and high pressure situations. So I would not imagine that somebody like Manic Loser felt intimidated by Phil or could feel his aura or anything like that. But speaking of wild cards, Phil was definitely doing a lot of out of the book things that seemed to have thrown people off, and it worked out for him.
Yeah, it certainly did. Dara, we were talking about this during the event itself. Obviously, it took place over several days, but it really feels like PokerKing and WPT have found something that really works here. I wrote a couple of articles about the event, and I pointed to the quality of the commentary. You had Jamie Kerstetter and Joe Ingram bringing color, but you also had Olivier Bousquet and Lucky Chewy and Nick Schulman and Doug Polk doing really good hand analysis. What stood out for you, Dara?
I think the format was a winner. It was quick enough that that it was engaging, but it wasn't just like one of the old-fashioned total and utter crapshoots. I also think the general coverage was really good. Top-class commentators. You didn't manage to get into the box, so that kind of illustrates that they only hired the best.
No need for it.
But yeah, even the fact that guys like Olivier came straight from their match and jumped into commentary, I thought that sort of added. There was also good social media presence. You had a sense that they were all having good fun down there as well, which is something that it is important, I think, to convey that to the outside world. Poker should look like fun, and this looked like a really fun event. And yeah, I think it was a massive positive. I think it is a winning format.
Was it as fun behind the scenes as it looked, Thomas?
Not for me. Yeah, there's a lot of work.
Where's your tan, Thomas? Why aren't you all like sunburnt and tanned?
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of people really got baked out there, like Joey and Olivier. But the feedback that I got from people that participated, worked the event, played in it was overwhelmingly positive. David, people often, when they bust a tournament, they want to just get out of. They're on the next flight out. Doesn't matter where they are. I see it all the time, especially even in exotic locales like for PCA and tournaments like that. Not a single person did that on this stop. I was actually pretty blown away by how much people enjoyed the trip, and I don't think it was just because it was at like a nice resort, in a city like Cabo. I think the group of players was a big part of it too. Everybody that we invited were just very cool, personable, fun to hang out with people, and it worked out well.
Yeah, I said that in one of my articles as well. I thought that it was a real showcase for how the modern player, if you like. Now, I know these guys are probably somewhere in the middle school. They're not old school. They're not brand new either. But that demographic who probably fall around my age, how many personalities and characters there are in the game, and how for a long time there used to be that narrative of the the robots and the wizards and whatever. That was a really false narrative, I always thought, and I think these guys showcased how much personality exists in that demographic.
I would agree with that. There is something to be said for the guy who shows up to like your local casino and he's wearing the hoodie and the sunglasses and he's not talking and he just listens to his music or watches Netflix for 6 hours. But I think it's really an unfair generalization that just hit a whole generation of players. And I think a lot of these guys did not really get enough of an opportunity to showcase their personalities. And I think largely the poker world has kind of slept on a lot of these players. Guys like Nick Petrangelo. Now, in this particular event, he busted the first round, but this guy, he's really fun. Like he's an amazing guy to talk to. When he teaches poker for Upswing and things like that, he's very good at conveying complex topics in a way that's digestible to the average person. And he's really funny. And just examples of that don't get shown enough. And I think one of the things we like to work on is bringing up some people that, deserve some spotlight rather than the same old faces that we've seen for 20 years. Not that there's anything, some of those characters are still great too, but I feel like we kind of gotten stuck on them.
I think that's a great point. The one thing, and I did want to push back because I thought it might be a little fun to ask you this question. The one format that it reminded me of, I obviously said it was quite a unique hybrid sort of thing, but the one thing it was a little bit like was the GPL, a format that famously flopped and one that you definitely spent a little bit of time making videos poking fun at. So what were the differences?
Okay, well, listen, like when planning this stuff out, we definitely, saw some similarities there too, but we wanted to look at things that made that a failure and, thought about how do we not replicate that? So a big part of why I think it was uninteresting was because there weren't really any stakes, where there might have been a prize at the end of it, but like the team format, a lot of these exhibitions were just like play money matches, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. The cube was interesting, but kind of a silly idea. So yeah, team names were a bit gimmicky. Listen, I could see some potential in the idea. Maybe it was just executed poorly.
So no squash court and actual prize money. That's the lesson we take away.
It's a big. I mean, I know it sounds obvious, but yes, having a big cash prize at stake is very important. People would not watch this event if it was like a $25 buy-in, no matter who's playing it.
So true.
I do remember a wonderful Doug Polk video poking fun at the GPO where it was done in the form of a breakdown, but every bet size was $0 because it was nothing being played for.
Because it all rounds to zero, as Doug would say. Yes.
Great. Well, from one Thomas Keeling production to another, the Ivey and Dwan interviews, possibly going to be part of a series of even more interviews, I don't know. This is being put on by PokerKing at the moment. Both of these guys are ambassadors for PokerKing. Both are obviously huge names in the game who are actually fairly underexposed. The Ivey interview is out already, and the Dwan one I know will drop any day. It may even drop before this does. Firstly, Thomas, you have pulled Joe Ingram back into the podcast content arena for these. Why was he the right man for the job, in your opinion?
Well, there's a few things about that. We previously did do some interviews with Ivey and Dwan that were also very successful on YouTube. One was a series of conversations between Phil Ivey and Barry Greenstein. And then there was another kind of a Ask Me Anything kind of a session where fans submitted questions for Tom Dwan. And then Nick Schulman sat down and sort of fired these questions at him. And he kind of explored and branched off into other conversational topics too. But that was a format that I found to be very successful. And I knew that it probably would be better than just like firing questions from behind a camera or with like a buttoned up interviewer type of person, because that's what I did for a couple of years when I worked at Bluff. I was the guy I interviewed Phil Ivey before, and I had like my list of questions and I just went one by one. And it's not the most effective way to go about, guys don't feel comfortable like that. I know that more conversational aesthetics tend to just kind of come off more real. So it's the reason that Joey, I guess I asked him to do this, kind of just happened on its own. Like I'd already invited Joey to come out to Cabo, do some content with us, maybe do some commentary. I knew he was going to be all over Instagram stories and stuff like that, just, showing off like, here I am, this is what a cool event. And so while I was already shooting some promotional stuff for like some ads for the upcoming event, I figured might as well bring Joey in there and do a pod. So yeah, it just kind of happened serendipitously. And I think the result was quite good.
Yeah, it sure was. Dara, Joey has had an on again, off again love affair, you might say, with content creation over the past few years. He seems to work in fits and starts, seems really passionate, enthusiastic for a burst of work, and then sort of quickly gets burnt out. I sometimes think that that has inadvertently created a pent-up appetite for his work, even more so than people have an appetite for it anyway. And then that creates higher and higher expectations for Joey, which in turn perhaps stress him out a little bit. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible. I think the world has moved towards a model now where it seems a positive to have constant and consistent output. You see the top Twitchers are the people who put in the biggest hours. You see the top YouTube channels are the ones that have the most frequent content. The algorithms actually favor people who do that. Joey's sort of more old-fashioned in the sense he's almost like the rock star who, puts out an album, tours it for a while, and then disappears off for 18 months and comes back, having allowed demand to build up in the way that you said. But you're right. I mean, I think that does place large expectations then when you do come back. Whereas when you have the more current model, let's say, your fans just kind of they're more forgiving. They're looking for sort of consistency of output rather than every podcast knocking it out of the park.
I would say Joey's fans do get a bit frustrated when there's droughts of content. You can see on the 2+2 threads, people complain a lot. But however, they're always pleased with the result when it's worth it, when he comes back and does like a big thing like the Ivey interview. So, I understand that, yes, there are like algorithmic concerns and probably even social media favors people who are getting in the mix and updating things frequently, but there is something to be said for quality over quantity. And sure, if you upload to YouTube 4 times a week, you might get more impressions served, but at some point your click-through rates are going to suffer. Your viewer retention will suffer. And there are people who grind YouTube for a couple of years and then the results start getting steadily worse because they took that like cynical approach to making content.
That's a great point. So the Dwan interview hasn't dropped yet, or at least from our perspective, before this has maybe gone out, it hasn't dropped yet. He's been a relative enigma for, I want to say, almost a decade now. People thought he was locked in a cage and in debt of tens of millions to the triad gangs at one point. What can we expect from this interview?
So part of the reason, by the way, the reason it's delayed is simply because with Phil and with Tom and with a few other people, we've assured them that nothing's ever going to get published without them seeing it first. Because guys get burned sometimes, sometimes when people do these kinds of interviews, they try to get like the most salacious, like the best headline you can get out of them. If there's shots fired or drama or something crazy that they said that it's going to make people, flock to see it, then they'll exploit it. And then, next time when that happens to somebody, next time they give an interview, they might be more, close to the vest and won't want to go into details about certain things. So in order to avoid that, I just like to tell people, hey, just say whatever's on your mind. If you say anything stupid, we'll cut it. If you slip up and mention something that you weren't supposed to talk about, we can cut it. We'll show it to you first before anything goes out there. And when you do that, people like unwind a lot and really do speak their minds. And then sometimes they'll even things that make it in are just going to be way better. So that's the thing with that. Like we ran Phil's interview by him before we put it out there, and it's the same thing with Tom. Tom has just not like finished. I think he's watched like half of it. So also actually
bit of a challenge.
He may have finished it actually. I think there was like a couple of stories that he told and he wasn't sure. You have to like ask the people that they're about, like, is this okay to say?
We've been in that spot. We've been in that spot a couple of times over the years as well, where somebody would tell usually a high stakes story, usually something involving a large sum of money in a private cash game or something like that. And it's a great story and they tell it like full throatedly. And then they go, oh no, fuck, maybe I maybe I can't say that. Maybe that guy's going to be real pissed off at me now. And we have actually had to cut a couple of great stories out down the years. Dara, you probably remember a couple of those.
I do indeed, yeah. I do indeed. I remember a few cuts. We also had to cut a guy's admission of how much makeup he had been in at one point.
He made us bleep it.
These are the kind of things people get sensitive about.
Yeah, when I worked at Bluff, there was this crazy incident where somebody made counterfeit chips and he introduced them into a tournament. You guys remember this? I think this is at Borgata. Yeah. And then I think like his room got raided by police and he tried to flush the fake chips down the toilet and he went to prison over it. I did an interview with somebody who was like one of his victims basically, and he was like really upset and he had all this stuff to say about it. And as soon as I finished recording, he found me down the hallway and he chased me down. He said, hey, probably shouldn't have said some of those things that I said because this guy's trying to get paid, you know, like maybe he doesn't want to upset. There's an investigation. So that was like a real bombshell of an interview that I sadly had to put back on the shelf. It happens sometimes.
Yeah, it does happen. We feel it from your side of it too. It's happened a couple of times. Well, speaking of high-profile interviews, what a great segue, by the way. That was just seamless. Do you like that segue, Dara? I'm moving into the helmet thing there. I thought that was really well done. That was one of my best ones.
I think you pay far more attention to segues than anybody else in the world does. So yeah, I'll give you props for your segues.
We turn now to the exclusive Phil Hellmuth interview from our great friend Paul Seaton over at Gamble Online. Paul seems to be the Hellmuth whisperer. He always seems to get Phil for a chat at the most prescient moments. This time, of course, right on the heels of his third victory over Daniel Negreanu. We previewed that match on our last show. I'm already laughing remembering it. Sorry. We previewed that on our last show with Tonka. We all predicted a Hellmuth victory. I will admit smugly that I've now won money all 3 times on Hellmuth. It is hilarious just how he cannot seem to be beaten these days. No one can figure it out. Paul asked Phil how it felt to beat Negreanu again, and his quote was, "In my 20s, it might have been about ego. In my 30s, I might have been blasé, but in my 50s, you learn as you get older, it's about the journey." It's very philosophical. Plus, it's not a WSOP bracelet, which I would feel better about. I went into this match feeling pretty normal, and I've come out of it feeling pretty normal. Dara, Phil has talked about his sort of almost panic attacks and how he had one of those ahead of playing Esfandiari in the big 200K match, the last one he played against Antonio. He seemingly has no repeat of this. What do you make of Phil's more stoical disposition here, as he describes it in the article? And you've gotten older over the years too, Dara. Have the wins under your belt begun to feel different?
Yeah, I think you can describe it as, I mean, to be honest, I was pretty stoical in my youth. I'm not sure that there's been that much of a shift. And I've recently been reading 2 books written by my aunts, and one thing that's becoming abundantly clear is stoicism clearly runs in the family. Pretty much every character they describe in my family appeared to have that approach to life. But in terms of Phil, I mean, you know, it's how Phil feels today. Tomorrow he'll be blowing up because somebody said something on Twitter disrespecting him, and he won't be as focused on the journey. The start of that quote was definitely the kind of thing you could put a fountain behind and put it on Instagram and would get lots of likes. But I mean, he's obviously won 3-0, so yeah, obviously he feels good about it. He's shown he feels that he's thumbed up his nose at his detractors, which he continues to have many of. I believe he was actually the underdog in all 3 legs on the betting market, which is quite remarkable given just the, you know, you would kind of think after maybe the second one, people would think, well, maybe actually Negreanu doesn't have an edge after all. But yeah, I mean, I think the main thing out of it is it's just so funny. It's just hilarious what's happening to see Negreanu, who supposedly, you know, put in all that study to lose to Poke, but at least now understood GTO, was taking on the ultimate exponent of the old school and got walloped 3-0. Yeah, that's pretty funny, no matter how you cut it.
You know, it's one thing to talk about Hellmuth's winning streak, but I feel that buries the lead, and that is Negreanu's epic losing streak. When's the last time he won a heads-up match? Because from what I understand, it goes all the way back to the 1 drop that he finished second place in. Like even before, when's the last time? It's been a long one, right?
We definitely haven't buried that lead on this show. That will be 2030.
I think somebody needs to do the math, and let's count the
It's
total sum of money.
14 in a row. 14.
I think
Okay.
I think Mike Haxton did the math on a previous thing, and it was 8,000 to 1, I believe.
Okay, but let's count the money though. Okay, so the difference between first place and second on all of these, and let's total it. It's got to be in, God, how many million? It might be in the 8 figures. It's got to be at least 10 million, right?
Yeah, it probably is. It probably is. Thomas, sparing a thought. This was going to be my next question now. So you've completely ruined the tone of this one. Sparing a thought for the vanquished Negreanu here. After a lot of bluster and frankly, a lot of putting down Hellmuth for months, D-Negs, similar to when Polk put him to bed, kind of cut a very magnanimous figure after the defeat, very kind of hangdog. One of Daniel's great skills is narrating the present in a way that's very favorable for himself. Do you think that after the Doug match, and then of course he thought he would have a walk in the park against Phil relatively, do you think he's now finding it hard to spin a positive?
No, I think that's probably the correct way to go about it. There was a mixed martial artist named Ronda Rousey who used to be infamous for being very boisterous and, you know, had a lot of ego and stuff. And then as soon as she lost her first fight, I think she just disappeared for a couple of years and kind of buried her head. And, you know, that's not the way you want to go about things. You want to kind of, you know, have some dignity and hold your head up and say, yeah, you know, I'll get him next time. So I think the way Daniel handles that is fine. Some of us are making fun of him for being on an epic losing streak, but I'm sure at the end of the day, it's not really going to, you know, hurt his feelings too much. Like, he'll be fine. He's fine.
He's fine, Dara. We can continue until the losing streak ends. He's fine.
Yeah. I mean, to give him credit, he does handle these things well, at least after they happen, and you know, he's still an incredibly successful.
Well, you know, then again, I'm sure there was lots of like desk pounding and cursing and air kicking and sausage holding, but once that dust clears, you know,
yeah,
head up high, stiff upper lip.
I forgot about the sausage holding.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess we didn't have to see the immediate aftermatch on map on Twitch. We did make the point that when all those Twitch blowups were happening, that it just wasn't a good format for him, because he obviously needs that period to clear out his head before he can go out and be magnanimous, and that's not possible on Twitch when the camera is right on you after it happens.
When he played Doug, both players had 360 cameras in their playing space just to, you know, make sure there's no funny business going on with, you know, extra software or anything like that. So somewhere the footage exists of every Daniel session against Doug. I haven't asked Doug. I would love to see to be a fly on the wall for some of those sessions.
Yeah, there could be some amazing outtakes there for sure. Moving on, Phil's next opponent on High Stakes Duel will be Fox Sports presenter Nick Wright. I don't think anyone saw this one coming. With Hellmuth teasing the possibility of a 100K match versus either Dwan or Ivey if he were to win that. Again, this comes from the Gamble Online piece by Paul. He's asked Phil the question: which of your boys, I'm calling them your boys now, Thomas, which of your boys wants it more against Hellmuth in round 2?
Sorry, which boys are we talking about? Nick Wright?
No. Dwan or Ivey?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've heard that Dwan might get in the mix there. So, you know, I'm sure both of them would be up for it. You know, high stakes, heads up, no limit hold'em. Those are things both of those guys love. They'll just want a big heads up tournament. So who wants it more? Hard to say. Probably pretty close.
Fair enough. Well, moving on. I don't have a good segue this time, Dara. Just going to do a moving on.
Moving on is your go-to.
Yeah, to fall back on that one. There was a wild story which broke yesterday. I don't think I have a question at the end of this, but I just have to read this story because it's fucking mental. The French businessman and high-stakes poker player Arnaud Mimran has been sentenced to 13 years for kidnapping. That's right. Mimran, who poker players might remember as the guy, he came 13th in an EPT in Monte Carlo back in 2006, but more famously, he was the guy who paid a 50K deposit to play the one drop and then didn't show up. It was a non-refundable deposit. But yeah, he's been sentenced to 13 years in a French prison for masterminding the 2016 kidnapping of the Swiss financier Yomi Rodrigue. I have to read a couple of these details. It is wild. According to reporting from casino.org, Rodrigue was bundled into a car by a gang led by a man named Sabir Titu and forced to buy millions of shares in a shell company called Cassidy Ventures Inc., which was controlled by Mimran. When Goldman Sachs called Rodrigue back to say they would not take the trade because it was, quote, bizarre, his kidnappers forced him to buy the shares through a smaller broker the following day. The day after that, T2 was shot dead on his own doorstep. Suddenly now lacking a leader, the kidnappers scheme and it all kind of fell apart and they let Rodrigue go. They told him he was lucky because he had been earmarked to be killed at the end of it anyway. Rodrigue had been held for 6 days and was forced to buy 2.6 million in shares, although his kidnappers had ultimately wanted to get more out of him. It turns out now that Mimran, who is already halfway through an 8-year prison sentence for a $1.6 billion VAT fraud scheme, is believed to have been behind all of this. So, maybe not a poker story, but a poker player of someone we kind of tangentially are aware of in the community. It's a fucking movie.
Yeah,
there.
well, I mean, we've spoken before. I mean, these are not really poker stories. We all know that some dodgy people play poker, and they're not poker players. You have to have money to play poker, and sometimes that money doesn't come from exactly legitimate sources.
You got to assume.
I mean, I will say the French stories are usually a lot more entertaining than the.
You got to assume now that the one drop buy-in was probably going to be money laundering now as well. Allegedly, I'm speculating if he had managed to pony up the other 950.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of hanging out with the French one year in Vegas, and it is very marked when you hear them talking about all the stories that go on in French poker. There is some very, very colorful stuff that never really makes it out of the French poker communities. There are certainly some interesting characters hanging around the fringe of French poker.
Yeah, there sure is. Well, look, the Win 10K is in full swing right now. At the time of recording, I think there's about 60 or so players heading into day 4. Amongst them are Maria Ho, Ralph Perry, there's a blast in the past, Cliff Josephy, Alex Foxen, Harrison Gimble, Toby Lewis, Tom Marchese, and Ari Engel. The winner will walk away with 2 million. This event is very much the main event of the summer in Vegas. That's obviously because the WSOP has been moved to the autumn with the main event in November. Dara, you wrote a blog this week giving some WSOP recommendations. Can you give us maybe your top 2 or 3 tips?
Yeah, and a lot of people have been asking me recently because they're, people who always had it on their bucket list to go to the WSOP but never got around to it, and now the pandemic has sort of concentrated minds and made people realize they just can't take it for granted that they'll always be able to do it. So a lot of people are actually planning to go to the WSOP, travel restrictions allowing for the first time this autumn from this part of the world. So people are asking for specific tips. Usually they're focused on how much it's going to cost and what's the best place to stay and all that stuff. And I mean, for that stuff, I would say just go and read the blog. I talk about how it's a very personal decision, and I've actually tried all of the alternatives. Living near or even in the Rio, living in a house on the outskirts, living in a condo on the Strip, living in a better hotel, all those things, and they all have pluses and minuses, and it's very much personal what you want. The one thing I always tell people, there's 2 things I guess I'll focus on. The first one is just, it's important to mentally prepare for the fact that it might not go exactly the way you imagined. It's kind of like the live equivalent of a Sunday. Every online player knows we start every Sunday feeling wonderfully chipper, and this is going to be we're going to win at least one major, maybe more. And then we end it at 4 a.m. in the morning crying in at our computers, very, very disappointed at how it turned out. The WSOP is kind of like that, stretched over 4, 6, 8 weeks, however long you're there for. You play roughly the same amount of tournaments. They're all high runner fields. The variance is massive. It's the one place where you can happily bust 5 or 6 live tournaments in a day. And, live tournaments feel different from online tournaments in the sense that you're more emotionally invested. So you can actually feel beaten up very, very quickly. Even within a few days, you might have busted 20 tournaments and now you're starting to, you're stuck a long way from home, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just sort of mentally prepare for that. If you're there for longer than a week, definitely give yourself a day off every week to sort of just do a mental reset. I think that's quite important. The second thing is more mundane, is taxation matters. If you're coming from Ireland or the UK, you don't have to pay tax on any American winnings, but you do need an ITIN number, I think it's called, to prevent the casinos from withholding it. Now, the WSOP are very good on this, actually. When an Irish or English person cashes for the first time, they file all the necessary paperwork and they get your number for you, and then they keep it on file thereafter, so you don't have to do anything else. But other casinos are not as forthcoming. I had an Irish guy a few years ago come to me, say he just won a major amount in one of the other casinos. I think it was the Venetian, and they just said, no, we're keeping 40%. You don't have the number. So he basically lost 40%. Now, I don't know whether he ever got it back. There is obviously a reclaim mechanism, but you have to go through tax lawyers, etc., etc. So it might not even be worth your while. So if you are playing in other casinos, just bear that in mind. You may end up having to sort all that stuff out yourself, and you definitely don't want to be paying 40% of your ill-gotten gains. The other thing the final point I would say on that is that the fact that Irish and UK players are exempt from taxation does allow you additional leverage sometimes in deals. There was a famous deal a few years ago where an Irish player who was at very, very distant 5 of 5, I think he had about 4 big blinds when the average was 40, managed to get first place prize money because it locked up a deal which kept all the Americans under the 10K threshold on which they had to pay tax. And I've heard other similar stories involving British players as well. The Americans have a very strong incentive to stay under 10K or whatever the current threshold is. It might have been increased since, and that will actually give you additional leverage sometimes in deal making.
Do they chop up that first place money after it's over? Is that how that works?
Yeah, that may or may not happen behind the scenes. Who knows? Yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, nice exploit though. I like it. Thomas, you must know a lot about Vegas. Have you any tips?
For the WSOP, I have no fucking tips. I'm sorry, I cannot help you. If you are out here playing the WSOP in September, right? You're on your own. I've never played in the WSOP. Still a bucket list item for me.
Well, Dara neglected to point out that like he's tried all the ways to live: condo, fancy hotel, off the strip, next door to the Rio. But living with me surely is the nuts, Dara. If you have an opportunity to stay with me in Vegas, that must be the ultimate tip, yeah?
It was very memorable, yeah. It was
so memorable you did it another time. So
yeah, for sure, yeah. I mean, I think I'm on record as saying that you're like, when I met you, I didn't particularly like you.
No, there's no need. We don't need to go back into these stories now. Okay, let's.
I thought you were pretty horrible, really, but you're always entertaining. So your main function has always been just to make my surroundings more entertaining.
And I don't remember whether I've told this on this show. It must have come up on some show at some point. But the very first time I showed up in Vegas, I was all chipper, like Dara described, beginning of a Sunday, and Dara just walked me to all the famous landmarks, as he referred to them, which were all the places where Irish people cried after doing their bollocks in big events. And he said, well, look, there's where Nick Newport was in the fetal position after he busted the main. There's where so-and-so else, I won't even say the other name. Sorry, Nick. Shouldn't even mentioned your name, Nick. Apologies. But yeah, just all the different Irish people who did their, proverbials.
Yeah, well, I did say that it is important to prepare yourself for that. I mean, I always say that you will never see such a contrast as the start of the series when everybody's bouncing around the Rio, really, really happy, thrilled to see all their friends, and this is going to be, they're going to win a bracelet. And then the dead zombie shuffle towards the end of the series when they're literally just waiting for their plane to be able to go home.
Well, at this stage of proceedings, Dara, we usually turn back to you for a strategy nugget. Would you have a little strategy tidbit for our audience?
Yeah, well, before I get onto that, actually, one thing I forgot to mention, and I noticed I have 40 notifications on my phone reminding me to do it. I believe you had a deep run in the Supernova, David, this week. Would you like to talk about that? At
the beginning, Dara. The moment was at the beginning. You skipped over it. I thought, oh, that's small. The love gone.
No, but do tell us about the Supernova. How did that go for you?
I came third in the Supernova. The Supernova is Unibet's flagship event on a Sunday. It's £100 buy-in, 20k guarantee. It overlaid all of the last 3 weeks. It'll probably overlay again next week and the week after and the week after that. So jump in, guys. And there was loads of dead money, so I got to take some of it. It was nice to get it.
Was this your second deep run in recent times?
Do you know what? I didn't ask you to tee up a brag, but if you're going to ask me the straight question, this is actually the 9th time I've cashed the Supernova in the last 12, and I've made 4 final tables.
That is Hellmuth-esque.
It's Hellmuth-esque. Yeah.
Unfortunately,
but only in one tournament, nothing else.
My recent record is Negreanu-esque, so yeah, we're at different ends of the scale on that. Okay, anyway, to come to the strategy piece. So probably, I mean, definitely the most, if you think about the common situations in poker, you know, people look at like all sorts of fancy situations like river check raises, etc. But the most common situation is one player raises and the big blind defends. And what's the most common type of flop? The ace high flop. There are more ace high flops than any other flop. So how do you play ace high flops? Well, that's a question I get asked a lot. Like, what do I do on an ace high flop? And the answer is, it's actually quite different. You have to distinguish between different ace high flops. You know, ace middle card low card is different from ace low card low card. In fact, the ace low card flops are really stand out as a class on their own, because on an ace low card, usually the big blind will have straights. They'll have two pairs, and they'll have the two bottom sets, and the opener, particularly if they've come from early position, actually doesn't have those hands. So therefore, that's a flop the imposition player actually has to be much more careful on, even though in general ace high flops do favor the opener. And you see when you work with solvers that the solvers all tend to size down and to see bet less frequently on those flops. Typically 1/3 is the preferred size compared to 2/3 on other ace high boards.
That's a great tip. Thomas, I'm interested to know, over all the years and all the videos you do, how much do you absorb from Doug when you're making those videos? Do you think it made you a better poker player, or is it kind of you're disconnected because your ear is to what's working as a presentation?
You would think so, because I've listened to probably hundreds of hours of Doug, and also a bunch of upswing instructors talking about poker, doing some edits on those videos as well. I talked to Doug about this once, and Doug assumed that I must have absorbed quite a bit just through osmosis, and I must be like a half decent player. But not really. No, I would say it's kind of just in one year, out the other. I don't know, man. I've always been a big fan of poker. I never played it super seriously, and I was always a cash game player primarily. So it's been a couple of years since I've really even gone out onto the live field and played some cash games. Maybe I can do that now.
Well, before we let you go, I am interested to know what more you have in store. Obviously, your role at PokerKing Media has already borne significant fruit in these interviews and in the collaboration with WPT. Is there anything in the pipeline you can tell us about, or is it all top secret?
I don't know if I can go into specifics, but what I can tell you is that I do intend to put on some more events like the one that you just saw in, cool locations with high stakes players and some other types of internet personalities that you just saw. I'm working on a couple of documentaries, which I hope I can talk about in the near future. And honestly, man, I just want to make cool shit. That's really the motto. Is, as a fan, I've watched High Stakes Poker and Poker After Dark and PokerStars Big Game and the WSOP on ESPN. And I've always wanted to be able to go in there and make productions in that vein. And I'm going to use this opportunity to make things that I feel like people like me would love to see. And it's really all I can do.
Thank you for that unbelievable amount of no specifics and no.
Okay. Look, I'm going to do some cash games. We're going to do probably some more heads up stuff. We're going to do some documentaries.
Who's going to be name one person who's going to feature in one of these documentaries? I'm
sure Tom and Phil. Oh, in the documentaries? Can't do it. Sorry.
Okay, so it's possible that every possible variant of poker might be in there, and every single person in the poker industry, nobody has been ruled in or ruled out.
But it gives hope, because like my follow-up bit was going to be, if you're going to Cabo again, do you need like two Irish guys? We'll get sunburnt, no problem. We'll take the flight if invited, of course.
We're all full for the next Cabo trip, but you guys can definitely, you can be on the waiting list as alternates for sure.
You might get to Rosvedov, David.
Yeah, wait till PokerKing Media start doing stuff in Europe. He'll come crawling back.
Yeah, no, we're gonna hold some big heads-up tournaments in Siberia. So you guys can come for that one.
On that note, Dara O'Kearney, thank you for your contributions as always.
Thank you, David.
And to our guest, Thomas Keeling, thank you for everything.
Thank you.